Thank you all for spending the time with us today. And what I want to do over this next period of time is give you an understanding of our vision and view of our partnership with Apple and this business and the reason we did this. There's a lot of history and a lot of really interesting. The really exciting thing about doing this was, the fun thing that kind of kept you going through the tough parts of putting up any kind of project is, you always think about what's it going to be at the other end. The really interesting thing about doing this project, and I'll try to share with you some of the personal stories as we went through this. I think the hardest thing was not being able to tell a soul what you were working on, and that was like. And that was always quite interesting in the early pieces. The other interesting challenge that we had in doing this was getting the right level of, you needed to kind of define the event before people really took you seriously that you were doing stuff. But the challenge is that the notion of putting two companies, that each of which comes from a really particularly strong position of strength in their core capability, putting those two things together was, seriously major news. I think when it was all said and done, the IBM Apple partnership got over 500 million Twitter impressions. So it was kind of like people were like, so it was like one of those things. But to that end, like we really couldn't talk to people about it internally, and the one thing we knew is that we really wanted to actually really have a clear vision to the marketplace. So what I want to do is take you through how we kind of got to this point, and then our view of mobility of the future, and the work that we are going to be doing. I mentioned this notion of position of strength. IBM Mobile First is very double, triple-digit growth year on year as a category for the IBM company. This was an area that, and we are doing fantastic things with our enterprise technology and our cross-platform mobile technology approach and WorkLight. So we were in great strength. FiberLink and MAS 360 had just come online, and that was becoming an important part of our portfolio. Cloud and Trusteer, we had acquired some great businesses, and we had built that in addition to our backend services platform, which was going quite strong. So we're like, this is great. Our consulting business was also growing rapidly. So what was our big need to do this, especially since we have done so much work in the enterprise? The exact same time, Apple in enterprise, I don't know if you recognize that their market share in enterprise is twice their market share that it is in consumer world. And if you look at their statistics, 99% of the Fortune 500 companies allow an iOS device to be connected to their network. They're in every Fortune 500 company. So it's not, from their perspective, they had great strength in this space. So why did they need to do this as well? And it's because they both recognized that this whole thing was around transformation of the enterprise, changing the enterprise. And exactly what was this about? So I think the best way that we thought about it together, and this became a defining moment for us to talk about what we were going to do. Over 60% of the enterprise usage of mobility is calendaring and email. And this was whilst they liked it, it was an important market for Apple, it wasn't going to give them the growth that they wanted in their business. And frankly, it's not, I think, what has brought you guys here to do calendaring email. necessary function, an important part of the business, and well absorbed and well used. The next major green stripe is what we saw most of enterprises are doing, and if I look at a lot of some of the ERPs, they're strongly in this space as well, which is effectively, if you think about what a phone or an iPhone or an iPad does, the most important functions it uses is the cellular or Wi-Fi. And it was basically using it as a browser. Safari was the number one app that was used because you were using HTML5 renditions, or you were actually just going directly into screens. And every single one of us has this in our lives. We have to go to a screen. There's not a really good mobile transaction. We all know about pinching into the transaction. And that was the next major wave. And what we started to see is there is actually a whole new category of apps and opportunities to go after. New level of value that we could create together. This did a couple of things. First of all, the BYOD phenomena we saw starting to taper. And we saw starting to taper because iOS had reached most of the security standards. The CIO had figured out how to deal with Apple. And Apple, a lot of CIOs we've talked to, originally started with the original and second iPhone when CIOs were, executives said, I want to connect this. I want to get my email on this. And so that's where BYOD happened. Now we're actually starting to see this whole movement towards company provisioning of devices. So how does that and the transformation message come together? Office workers, we can probably figure it out. But if you're working in a mine and you actually want to do safety incident reporting, I don't want a mine worker taking their own business office phone, doing calendaring, email, and Facebook on their device. And so there's a really interesting balance of company provisioning, and we move into these new transformation spaces. So we basically said, how do we create that dark blue space together? Because we recognized as a company our core business being transformation. We're in the business of helping large enterprise move from one state of capability to another state of capability, and giving them the infrastructure, the services, and the operational capability to get there, and the consulting to redesign the processes. That's our core business. And Apple was like, how do we get clients to create demand for this marketplace? And we together said, that's why that dark blue space is a great opportunity. Now, Apple said, and we together actually said this, I shouldn't say Apple said, we together recognized that what were we seeing were the barriers for adoption for the mobility. Now, we all agreed that dark blue space was the opportunity, but there were so many things because this was such a new technology. My guess is that this room, 3 to 5 years from now, you're going to need the big hall, Alexa. You're going to need the big hall to make this thing work, because we are at the very early stages of mobility adoption. The only difference is that the timelines to make it happen is going to happen more rapidly. But we all know these challenges. Every one of you have faced these challenges as leaders in the space. And we know that when you do these new kinds of technologies, they're changing rapidly. I think of it as the early days of the internet. Remember the early days of the internet? What we looked at was consumer apps, consumer applications, retail websites. Those are the early days of the internet. That's the early days of mobility. All people think around are the B2C apps and the B2C consumption usages. What we're talking about is using mobility and iPhone, iPad as the vehicle for transforming your core business. So then we all of a sudden thought about the things that IBM had done so well. And this is where our collaboration in the early conversations, we began to realize the opportunity, this new category that we could create together. And it's this fundamental notion. Imagine taking and putting in the hands of an employee the collective knowledge of your entire enterprise, all of your decision-making capability, and being able to make that decision at the absolute moment of truth, wherever that is. That is the fundamental premise that we're talking about. My colleague, my counterpart at Apple calls this the Bionic Brain. The ability to take core analytics, contextual data, and be able to feed it to that employee at that moment. That becomes a completely different paradigm. And the way I think about this is as follows. Stick with me on this journey, because this is a slight conceptual notion, but we think it's really important and fundamental to the vision that we're painting together. In the consumer world, I want to point to 4 apps. These are the 4 I use. You can pick any more you like. Think about weather. The way we did weather before the iPhone weather app was we either went to weather.com, which was not quite advanced at the time. We would wait and watch the television at 6:20. Think about maps, planning a family trip. The way we did that before the iPhone and after the iPhone. Well, some of us were inspired in the middle, and we used MapQuest. Right? Think about Shazam. You know, we'd hum a song to somebody, and we'd hum it to them and listen. That's how we would do that. Or think about Uber. What's the latest number? 14 million, 17 billion, of market capitalization? Again, same basic thing. What did we do before? What did we do after? In every one of these cases, we did 2 to 3 things happen. 2 to 3 things happen in the consumer example of this. Number one, it was tied to analytics. It was tied to data and analytics at the back end of the system. You know, we saw this Magic app, but it was tied to that. Number one. Number two, in every single one of these things, it created new capability that didn't exist before. So much so that every single one of us had that moment of, that's magic. How did it do that? Every single one of us had that moment of, that is seriously cool. And I'm certain if we open the room up and we actually do this in a workshop format, one of the things we do is we ask clients, what's your favorite app? Why is that your favorite app? And you actually kind of break it down on the things that drive people. But most importantly, and as a group of people that are in the business of making mobility successful in your organizations, in all 4 of those cases, I'll say this privately and quietly, we all had a moment, and we said to ourselves, don't tell Apple this. I don't care what this thing costs. I'm going to buy one. I'm going to find out how to buy one. I'm going to find out how to get the budget to buy one. I'm going to figure out how to break my contract. I'm going to figure whatever it takes. I'm going to buy one of these things. We have to do that for the lines of business in the enterprises that we serve. We have got to give the line of business in the enterprise a compelling business case. They just go, ah. And let me tell you, that is our objective here. Clients say, yep, I realize that's your standard and blah, 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 but I am absolutely willing to do this. And let me tell you, I've got clients that are so compelled by the apps that we're bringing to the market right now. That's fine. I'm happy to buy back and take back all my entire Windows phones, by way of example, because the app is so compelling, because the business case of value is so great. And we're going to talk about some of these. Now, what makes this work? Number one, I do this, I put a slide up because I say it's at this core of an iPhone or iPad. And I've been working with Apple too long. I'm kind of ruined here. I have a real problem with the word device. So I just call it what it is, an iPhone, iPad. I know you guys as mobility people still call them devices. Now I'm going to ruin you forever, and you'll probably be, whenever someone says a device, you'll think, is it iPhone, iPad? Or is it one of 56 variants of Android? And you can add watch to that as well. because I think that there's going to be a whole category of enterprise apps around wearables as well. But add to that, and when I talk about the device, it's not a device. Let's be very clear with each other. It is a mobile platform that has 17 unique functional capabilities other than Wi-Fi and cellular. I'm not sure if Wi-Fi and cellular might be 2 of the 17. But anyway, it has things like an accelerometer. It has, and we know the kind of things: signature capture, microphone, et cetera, camera, a number of functions that are quite unique. Now add to that analytic insight. The analytics. Okay, so yes, is that mapping software that we use? Yeah, that's mapping software that we use. Is that a database of songs and music from iTunes or waveforms? Yep, that's what that is. Is that a weather based on geoposition? Yes, that's that kind of database. Is that customer behavioral data? Is that machine reliability data or machine failure data? Is that patient data? See, when we think of analytical insight and mobility today, the best uses of this marriage right here, of these two things, of analytics insight and the mobile device, are large consumer applications. And so the number one thing is adding that analytical insight. So the example that you used earlier about the customer behavioral stuff, there's beginning to use good examples where you're actually using company systems of record and the insight generated from that in real time. The second thing is secure integration to enterprise services. I liken this to, once you are able to make a decision in the moment, being able to transact it securely in the moment. And if you put these three things together, you're now in a completely new space. I liken where we are in our industry, as you may remember the early days of e-commerce. Remember the early days of e-commerce when you'd go to a website and you'd order something, but you weren't sure if it was going to ship or you were going to get it because you weren't able to confirm the inventory as part of the transaction because the systems were disintegrated. We're moving to a new space here. You put these three things together, and what happens is we all of a sudden, in an integrated way, create a whole new category. And that's what we're talking about. Now, when we sat down and we thought about what are we talking about? We talked about what we called the Litmus Test. And this is a great, if you want to see a great partnership in action. So aside from the fact that our engineering teams are working together and our marketing teams are working together, when you watch our application developers, our consultants work with their Apple teams, their development relations teams, we've held these apps that we're talking about to a really super high standard. And we said, what makes an app magical? What makes an app have that moment of, I've got to break my contract and get one of these? What creates that standard? And these are the four things that we saw. Because remember, what we wanted to do is create that blue territory, a whole new category of transformation, so much that clients actually recognize significant value. And so we really came across these four things that we said, these are foundational. So number one, the pain point or the value creation point is so unbelievable that it pays for itself literally in days. The program pays for itself overnight. I'll throw just a couple quick ones out, just to really put this in context. You're on an airplane. You're going through Chicago. Your flight inbound from New York is delayed an hour and a half on the tarmac. And you're coming into Chicago, and you're in the air, and you already know you're going to miss your connection to Las Vegas. You already know it. You're in the air, you're stressed out. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? what you're going to do is your flight attendant's going to walk up to you by status and say, Mr. Balboni, I see that you've misconnected. You're not going to make it. These are the 3 choices you've got on flights, A, B, or C. Which one would you like me to confirm you on? And then airdrop it directly to your iPhone, your boarding pass. No stress. You know exactly. You've now created a major, major opportunity for a major point of loyalty. You've reduced the cost of the business. You've reduced the cost of the business because you no longer have these emergency gate agents. It becomes a point of differentiation. Or same identical airline, except as the plane pushes back, it already knows that your bag didn't make it. Your bag didn't make the plane. Flight attendant walks up to you and says, oh, I see your bag didn't make the plane. You can have one of 2 choices. We can tell us where you'd like the bag delivered, or if you'd like to, I can airdrop you a voucher for a meal, and you can collect it. It'll be on the plane that arrives in another 2 hours and 15 minutes. Or I can airdrop you a lounge pass, and you can go sit in the lounge while you wait for it. The cost savings there. First of all, just how many? We've all had the drama, right? We've waited for the bag. We waited the carousel for the 45 minutes. The bag finally doesn't arrive after it all comes off. Then we have to go look at the line, and there's this big line of people waiting to report their bag, lost bag. It is. Imagine you get off the plane, you know the bag, you know exactly where you're going to go with that. More importantly, it reduces the cost to the airline. You put those 2 things together, and these business cases are like, people go, like, so it's kind of unbelievable. Industry pain point. Number 2, it's powered by analytics. The insight that you get from these don't exist without the analytics and the triggers and alerts that happen within the core enterprise system. And also the execution side of that as well. So not only do you identify a situation, you make the trade, you affect the transaction. And you can do that securely. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that to really address that. Because that's an important component, we think, to doing this, is how to do that. And that's why we're really kind of excited by working with Apple on this, because if we did, in an IBM traditional way, we would try to make it clever, we try to make it smart, but no doubt all of us have security people in our organizations that try to, the securitization of our systems sometimes diminish their usability, would be the easiest way to do it. Third of all, every one of these applications are made for mobile. They don't exist without mobile. And I'm not just talking about wireless capability, I'm talking about taking advantage of the unique capabilities of iPhone or an iPad, whether it's the microphone. I like one of the apps that our team's working on through a third party right now, which actually you hold a microphone up to motors and engines that are running in in plants to determine its preventive maintenance cycle. Just listening, analyzing the waveform of different motors, of that historical motor. It's kind of quite interesting. So you just hold up to it, it knows where you are by GPS, it knows the motor, it measures it, and you do it as part of a preventive maintenance piece of capability we've got. So most importantly, made first for mobile. These are not reimagination, and this is, it's really as we did our first round of 15 of these apps as we're doing them, and we used our consultancy. So we used our global business services consultants to do this, and we're working. We have over 100,000 consultants working with clients on client problems, deep in business processes every single day. And as we brought the first round of these apps up, they were all really great ideas, but they weren't mobility enabled. They were basically just re-platforming a Java screen or an HTML screen onto a mobile device. And we actually really challenging us to actually make it first for mobile. You put those 3 things together, and then you add, most importantly, it enriches the life of every single employee. It empowers the employee to a whole new level of capability that they've never done before. And, I think of this 2 ways. One of which is adding that sense of of joy and releasing discretionary energy. You can think of it that way. You want to talk to your CFO? Yes, we can increase productivity. And some of the examples we have on this, the one we're doing right now for social caseworkers. Social caseworkers, the story it's a bit of a sad story because it's a hard case, because these are caseworkers that go to look after foster children or in foster homes, children in foster homes, or homes where a court has said there has to be a social caseworker that looks after this family on some period, whether it's because of welfare or some kind of court-ordered action. So the cases, these are not like headline great, IBM Smarter Planet stories, because they're a bit sad in their reality. They're not uplifting. But what's interesting is the issue, and every single government has this, every single state in the U.S. and actually every single state and municipality in the world has this, at least in the Western world has this. What happens is these caseworkers are young, they're social, and they're mobile by definition. Most of them, the turnover rate is nearly 50%. Most of them go into their household not knowing what risks they're facing, not knowing what possible situations are. And then what they do, and so they're not quite sure. They put Band-Aids on situations. They use their gut instinct. They're so new in the jobs, the turnover is so high, their skill level relatively low. And then they spend half their time sitting in front of a computer back at the office documenting the case. So here's a situation where they go in knowing they know what the possible case could be. They know what the risk factors are. They're given an exact set of instructions. What it ends up doing is it reduces the stress level of every single one of these people. It increases their effectivity level. So it recognizes they're new in the job. Let me tell you, you get much greater productivity out of the people, but much more interestingly, you get much lower turnover because they're actually making a difference in the community. It's really quite, so every one of these cases that we're talking about is just like this. So we're taking this to the market, and we are initially starting with initial 6 industries. This set of apps we are releasing literally in the next couple of weeks in the market, and we're going to have a formal launch late this year with press. But we're taking these to selective clients around the world, actually. And the initial industries are retail, financial services, telco, government, and I don't know why I can't think of the insurance. I'm sorry, and insurance is the initial set of industries. Our plan is by the end of next year we will have 150 of these. Now our view is these are pretty standard apps. When I say pretty standard, 70% standard, which is those of you that have worked with IBM before. We put a lot of really good tooling in place. We work with a lot of third-party ISVs, but we do a lot of custom work for clients. Our view is we're actually going to start with a really standard framework, and we're working very closely with Apple. We have a core design group that are actually located in Cupertino in their facilities, where a lot of these apps are being designed and developed. We're actually doing, the core design is being done in Cupertino with our UX UI teams, and then we actually do the development work in our studios in Atlanta and in Toronto, Chicago, and we're in the process of building up our India facility as well. I'll explain to you the why in a second. But the whole core of this is core standard 70%. Then some level of modification. People need some special screens. They have some special flows. And then on top of that, clients are going to require specialized companion apps that they can add to this suite. The other thing that's really important is I wanted to just give you the example I gave you a minute ago. I just threw a couple of quick screens up here just to give you a picture of and actually, I'm literally a week from having a real live demo. And I was going to bring a bunch of the demos, but I said, no, I better not, because this would be the worst audience to have a demo go completely wrong, and you guys would know if I was completely staged a demo. So instead I said I'd take a couple of screenshots and give you some pictures. This is an example of the Airline App that we talked about. where you actually can reschedule, where you're actually seeing the flight information. It's you learn a lot through this process, and we've this app by itself, just to give you an example of the process we've gone through, and as we're doing this, is that working with Apple, this was originally 34 screens. These couple of apps, really rich, really functional. This next major redesign, we got it down to about 12 screens. And they were to the iOS standard. They were not to a general purpose standard. And by the way, they looked really good at the time. We then took it down to our final incarnation for the launch event. It looked pretty darn good. Even Tim Cook said, "Oh, that's a nice looking app," etc. And then we worked with our Apple design team, and they said, and it's funny, the one thing about it, the thing I love the most about these guys is, you step on a scale, they tell you exactly what the number is. They don't say, "Oh well, I drank a lot of water before I stepped on the scale." They don't they confront the reality of whether something is a good-looking app and whether it's going to. They say, "Well, I'm sorry, this doesn't meet the standard. It takes more than two gestures to get the transaction completed." And we went bump. This is our final incarnation of it. What's unbelievable? It's so beautiful, and it takes advantage of everything. This is a good example of one of our Wealth Advisor apps, and we're doing some work in Wealth Advisors. Some really great things. The other thing I like about this is this shows how analytics is embedded directly into the app. So I'm just going to give you an idea of the kind of workflows that we're talking about, because we're talking about every aspect of business and use these, because we really think these are the fundamental things that people work on in business. And how can we, if we can radically take cost out or create greater value or create greater customer service in these kinds of transactions, we have the chance to transform business, to create a whole new category, a whole new capability. That you can get quite excited about, because what you're talking about is fundamentally doing in business what an iPhone has done for people's personal lives. It really changed, made fun, and create a whole new wave of value. So much so that I really do think that mobility could be one of the greatest opportunities for business performance that companies have. So this kind of gives you a picture of the kind of things that we've been working on. Now, to take this to the market, there are 4 core offerings that IBM is able to bring to the market as a result of our partnership with Apple. The first one is these mobile first for iOS solutions. And they kind of come in three flavors. The first flavor is what I've just spent a couple of minutes talking to you about. This is the set of applications that we've designed and we've developed using our consulting teams that understand industries, understand their clients, working with clients, and then working with Apple in terms of architecture and design. Now, I think that there's a really important thing to recognize on this. Let me take you through all 4 of these, and then I'll talk about that in the next thing. Second thing is the second component. There are 3 parts of the first one. 3 parts of it. The first one's the apps. Second one is ERP integration. Every single major client, major enterprise, has ERP at the back end. Many of them run your core materials processes, sometimes your CRM, your customer management processes, a lot of your back-end field service processes. We're working with each of the major ERP vendors because we recognize that's an important part of your backbone. And how can we make sure that these things integrate seamlessly with them? And by the way, every ERP vendor is down the road of exposing, creating mobile instantiations that look an awful lot like their desktop instantiations. And we think there's an opportunity to be able to, in the same way that we consult on all other kinds of apps, be able to create mobile first front ends designed with Apple that create these great end-user experiences. And at first, let me say that every ERP goes, "Oh, are you guys trying to get in the middle of our game?" No, we're not trying to get in the middle of your game. We're thinking about the end user. How do we create a great end user experience? How do we create more consumption of your ERP backend, not less? And be very clear, we have no intention in this space to go beyond connecting to the ERP. We're not there to do that. The third area is application maintenance and ongoing integration. You see, every single one of you knows that the cost of maintaining your app is not a minor thing. Every single one of you knows that this is not like an SAP implementation. We do it once and then we hopefully never have to do it again for at least 20 years. You guys know that the longevity of these apps and the business that uses them, I mean, let's be honest with each other, compose and dispose was invented here. And so what we need to be doing is recognizing that as these become mission critical apps, how do IT executives manage this effectively at low cost? Because there's an interesting challenge every IT executive has, which is how do I manage this code that's now my legacy? And Apple, gotta love them, release a new update every 6 weeks and a major update every year. How do we do that? Well, we have now a facility of, I think we're up to 900 people in our facility in Bangalore. They had iOS 8 for 4 months before it was released. And they have, I think, what is now the largest set of application code sets sitting in there. Either code developed by IBM, developed by third parties, developed by you, your enterprises. And under a really low-cost contract, we apply fixes, updates. Many times, we'll do the maintenance, and we'll do the enhancements, or sometimes you do the enhancements, you just hand us a copy of your code as you release it, in the same way that you hand a copy to the App Store, you're handing a copy to our center. Apple loves this. It's the largest code set that exercises their new releases. They love it because their operating system is constantly getting tested. They love it because we flesh out any kind of bugs in the operating system. You love it because, perish the thought, there's an errant API that makes a call that's not going to that doesn't work in the way that it was intended. You used an API in a way that it was not originally intended. We flesh that out. We can remediate that in advance of any kind of release, because you guys all know you can't stop people from saying, yes, I want to upgrade. So that whole management, and by the way, this is fantastic because this frees up your developers to work on new initiatives, which is really what they want to be doing, and they're getting smarter and smarter at every day. So those are the mobile first solutions, the first block. The second block is the thing that really makes enterprise different. And this is the back-end enterprise services that are required. I've got a whole special chart on this. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. But this is at the enterprise level. How do you connect your enterprise systems to the applications that you want to run native on iOS? How do you manage that? And that's also the MDM services, and we'll talk about that. The third one is IBM solving a major enterprise problem with an offer we call Supply, Activate, and Manage. This allows us to, in a really simple way, supply iPhones and iPads to clients under very simple, easy, painless lease arrangements, including a subscription to MDM, so that over-the-air configuration can be done. And then also as an integrator with Apple's device enrollment program, you just go immediately by serial number. It's just all you employ. The issue of imaging no longer is an issue. You open your iPad, by your serial number, your complete configuration is right there on your iPad. So the whole device management process goes away. Simple problem. And by the way, the pricing on this is unbelievable. And you should look at it. If any of you come from enterprises, the pricing on this is unbelievable. So it's really, really good the way we've packaged the leasing to make this problem be like less expensive than owning. That's for sure. So it completely changes CapEx, OpEx model. Last but not least is Apple Care for Enterprise, which we put together to the market with Apple. There's two variants of this. One version of you can buy directly from Apple and still has on-site support, which is provided by IBM. The other one is clients in classic Apple fashion. It's really great. It's by enterprise number of devices. It's not by device serial numbers. It allows you to take over fleets of devices. That's where we support Apple. The other side of it is clients say, yes, but I've got this fleet of this, that, and the other. And by the way, that also includes Macs as well. Clients also say, I've got this fleet of other things they want to bring into the mix, or they want special service level agreements for certain populations or certain locations, and all of a sudden it gets a little bit more complicated. Same service, it just becomes IBM branded, and that still has Apple Care inside of it, and the same level of support. So really solves the whole end-to-end maintenance problem that most IT organizations have that they don't really like to talk about. You put those things together, this is when this gets exciting, because from our perspective, we recognize the apps, they're clever, they're good. The real business gets transformed when you look at that thing end to end. Because we recognize you actually have to do the connectivity and the transformation with all your enterprise systems. And that's where this whole thing comes together in a seamless way, because we really reduce the complexity and manage the variables out of the system. I want to spend 1 minute in my last, I think I only have 1 minute left, talking about the iOS software services at the enterprise level that we've created. So we've taken our mobile first platform and we've packaged it in a way that addresses the enterprise issues. So we've used our Bluemix for mobile, our Bluemix capability, and taken a subset of that and taking 5 key components that are integral to integrating in the enterprise. And you can see them: integration, analytics, workflow, and cloud storage. And I also add transaction security. So geofencing, VPN fencing, some special kind of security transactions. It's really fraud detection, especially in financial services. And those 5 core transactions can then become a point of connectivity to any enterprise. Then we have an Apple-specific SDK, where the SDK presents itself as iOS bindings directly in Xcode. Over time, I'm not going to comment on this, but over time, this identical enterprise-level capability is the same way APIs that you would use to connect to any mobile device. Needless to say, through this partnership, I'm most worried about making sure that SDK is native to the Apple environment. But if my software brethren want to build an SDK for other environments, our view is the back-end APIs are the same. That's really important, because you guys know that the really costly side, when we actually have true enterprise integration and mobility, is just as much on the enterprise connectivity side of the APIs as it is in the actual app development and the SDK there. And so that's we do that. The other side is, we call it Mobile First Protect. You might have known this as MAS 360. This is around MDM and the necessary management services required for any enterprise. So these are the 2 really important pieces of our iOS software services. So we are really excited to be able to talk to you about this. And in the next couple of months, you're going to be hearing about our first wave of clients and our first wave of apps as they come to the market, and solutions as we come to the market, and our first round of successes. So on that note, do we want to open the room for a few questions?
So I'm Tom with Target. So this is very much kind of going away from BYOD, and you mentioned earlier that BYOD, in your perspective, is kind of tapering off. What data is really justifying that? Because the more and more that we do digging and look at industry research and what do we want to give our team members, we're seeing that BYOD is actually giving that choice to them is more and more important. And this is kind of taking us away from that. And it also, we talk about being device agnostic. And this, again, is very, very specific to Apple devices, which is the majority of our team members' devices as well. But it's how are you addressing those concerns from your clients?
Well, so when we talk about, I think BYOD in the the green and the yellow zones of makes sense. I mean, when the app is pretty well transformed, the platform is pretty much a generic platform, absolutely. The reason we are moving away from BYOD in this state is that we actually recognize that when you've got to marry 4 or 5 elements to really create apps that do hit those 4 litmus tests, and I'll start at the bottom this time, which is a great experience, that you actually connect securely to transaction systems, that you actually connect securely and speed with analytics, and then you actually create significant value. You think of those 4 things. We basically said, listen, you can't do this to have hardware, operating system, back-end integration services in the app. Those 4 layers, you can't do that securely engineering for the lowest common denominator of 56 versions of Android, and et cetera, et cetera. So what you end up doing is you end up going down to the lowest common denominator. We see the operating systems going in opposite directions. So email, calendaring, yes. But there are a whole bunch of apps, a whole bunch of category of apps, that the metaphor is completely different. So what we're finding, and the metaphors are diverging. So therefore, to take advantage of all of those things, we basically have now said, that's the reason we made this decision. One. The second thing is that now that the protectivity, like in that class of apps, those kind of apps, companies are providing the devices. I don't think BYD is going to go away for a series of apps, but for specific auditable transactions, those not at all. And so we're not seeing that. We're actually seeing that trend come off. That's all.
Okay, thanks. I think we've got
I have a question. Yeah. One more question?
Yeah, I guess one more question again, and then we'll probably need to wrap up for the next session as well. Sorry.
Hi, hey, great presentation. I'm Tom LaPlante, Topgolf International. A question for you. When you were laying out all the workflows and you said you were redoing this, what kind of either BPR, the old term, but re-engineering of the workflows did you encounter, and were you able to do? Because once you go mobile, that's a completely different set of transaction and processes for both your associates and the customer. And then part 2 of that question is, how did you get through just the normal change management issues that you're always going to be encountering?
No, it's a great question. First of all, I don't think the thing I love the most about this is if you engineer an app that's really super good, that uses that uses these design principles. Change management doesn't exist. Change management is not particularly needed. So the notion of change management, how to use these screens and putting all the guardrails and training is not nearly as big of an issue. Is our number 1 learning. Number 2. We actually looked at good consultants. You say, okay, look at a core business process. Where is the money made in that process? Or what is your major pain point? You go to an airline and say, what's the most expensive thing you've got in your business? Fuel. How do we manage the fuel? Let's do analytics on the fuel. What controls the fuel? But who makes the decision? The pilot makes the decision on fuel spend. Blah, blah. How do we look at that process, engineer that process? You get to the point of what's the most expensive thing? How do you do in the thing? If you're a construction company, what's the most expensive thing? Ripping up concrete after it's been poured. Great. Let's now look at the process of controlling that. Let's put Bluetooth temperature gauges in the concrete as we pour it, and then measure that, and we can actually manage the pour. Just things like so basically what you do is you begin to look at these flows are, where is the point of cost? What's the most, the social caseworker example, what's the biggest cost? It's really actually, one I dare not say, but it's lives. And number 2 is turnover and training and effectivity. How can you get, so you begin to look at those points of pain in a business. And listen, a lot of you guys come from major companies. So you look at your own business, what's your number 1 point of pain? And then you re-engineer that. The thing that we've been really quite lucky is this. Part of this is Apple's willingness to question everything. They question everything. Their engineering and their sales, their teams, they question everything. So and like versus all of us, like I'm a consultant, so if I walk into I walk into Target, I'm going to be I'm not going to ask irreverent questions of Target. I'm going to be very respectful and understand your environment and understand you're a great retailer, you know what you're doing. Apple's not afraid to do that. They just go and they question everything. But that blind questioning makes you go, wow. And it's that same kind of blind questioning that created, and so they've got a little bit of license and, they've got brand permission to listen to new things. So that whole, you put consulting deep knowledge and that knows how to actually structure and discipline it, and then you put people that are afraid to question every single norm. And Steve Jobs was very proud of me. He says, if I followed a CIO, there would be no iPhone because the CIO didn't see he needed an iPhone. This notion of not being afraid to question things allows us to kind of constantly rethink these kind of processes.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to call an end to this session. A great session. We let it go.
Thank you guys so much.
I don't know if you'll be around at all beyond this, but hopefully you will. If others get a chance in the breaks or the mingling sessions to.
We'll be around. I'm on LinkedIn if you really want to have more conversations. Don't be afraid to reach out. Thank you all so much. It's a real honor, real pleasure. We look forward to